In this video, I'm going to review using the formulas for the area and circumference of circles. These are formulas that are both on your GED formula sheet. These formulas involve the number pi. So you've probably seen the symbol pi. It's just a number. And we can use the approximation of 3.14. We can substitute that number for the symbol pi in the equation if we like. Or we can use the pi button on the calculator, and that gives us a much more exact version of pi. But both methods should give you the right answer, so I wouldn't worry too much about which one you prefer. But if you do see the answer in the multiple choice in terms of pi, like the answers might be 6 pi, 8 pi, 16 pi, then you should use the pi button when you're doing your calculation because it'll make it much easier to spot the right answer. Okay, let's talk about the formulas. Circumference, which we usually use the letter C for, is the distance around the edge of a circle. The formula is 2 times the number pi times the radius of the circle. Now, the radius of the circle is just half of the width of the circle, like that. If we were talking about the diameter of the circle, that would be the whole width of the circle. There should really be an arrow on the other end of that, but you get the idea. It's the diameter is the whole width of the circle. The radius is half of the width of the circle. And you'll notice that this formula uses the radius. All right, we'll practice that in a moment, but first let's talk about area. Area is the space inside of the circle. This formula looks kind of similar. It also involves pi, but in this case, we're going to multiply pi times r squared. Once again, we're using the radius. But this formula says we're going to square the radius and then multiply it by pi. And that will give us the space inside of that circle. Sometimes the answers for area or circumference will involve pi. I mentioned that a moment ago. So here we have a circle. It has a radius of 3. We know that's the radius because this arrow shows only half of the width of the circle. So the circumference for this circle would be 2 times pi times our radius, or 2 times pi times 3. And if you use your pi button in the calculator, that's going to give you an answer of 6 pi. And I encourage you to grab your calculator, pause the video right now if you need to, and do that calculation. And you'll notice that you get 6 pi. The pi button is on the left-hand side of your keyboard. Now, if you don't want that answer in terms of pi, you can hit the toggle key on your keyboard just above the enter key, and it will change that answer of 6 pi to about 18.85. Sometimes you will need to do that. A lot of times you will need the decimal answer. But this way, you get both answers. Let's move on to the area. The area equals pi times r squared. So that means pi times 3 squared. Your calculator will give you an answer of 9 pi. Then hit the toggle button, and you should get an answer of 28.27, rounded in the decimal form. So you want to practice going back and forth between these answers involving pi and the decimal. This is why I generally recommend students use the pi button, because we can get answers both ways as soon as we realize that the toggle button will go back and forth between them. All right, let's find the circumference and area of this circle. First of all, we have to grab our formula. So in the real world, when you're taking a test, you might have to look up this formula for a circumference. And we find that its circumference equals 2 times pi times our radius. So these are problems that I would strongly recommend you do with the calculator. 2 times pi times 5. And this should give you an answer of 10 pi. If we convert this to a decimal, we should get a number of 31.4 approximately. So we want to be prepared to give our answer kind of both ways. All right, let's do the area. The area is going to be equal to pi times r squared. Pi times our radius, 5 squared. Your calculator will give you the answer of 25 pi. And we convert that to a decimal and we get approximately 78.5. As I said, if you don't have your calculator right now, I would recommend you go get it. Go back a little bit in this video and work through that problem with me. Find the circumference and area of this circle. Now, what's different here is that they're showing the arrow across the whole circle. That means that this is a diameter. We don't want to work with the diameter. We want the radius, and we know that we can find the radius by just dividing the diameter by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is equal to 4. We know that half of the width of the circle is 4. Now we can do our work. Circumference is equal to 2 times pi times the radius, or 2 times pi times 4. The biggest mistake you might make here is to use 8. Don't want to use the diameter. We want to use the circumference. 2 times pi times 4. Your calculator should give you an answer of 8 pi. Use that toggle button above the enter key and convert that to 25.1. Now let's do the area. The area is equal to pi times r squared, or pi times 4 squared. Here's our radius up here. We want to make sure we use 4 and not 8. That's going to give the answer of 16 pi. Convert that to a decimal, and you should get 50.3. Okay, let's move on to our last topic here. Sometimes you will be given the area or the circumference and asked to find the radius or the diameter possibly. I've got 2 examples here. Here's the first one. We have this green circle and we're told that the area is equal to 314. So what's different about these problems is we need to use a little bit of algebra with the formula. Before I write that, let me write out the formula. Area is equal to pi times r squared. And in this case, we don't know r, but we do know the area. So I'm going to write 314 must be equal to pi times r squared. Now for this problem, I'm going to use 3.14 for pi to show you how that's done. 314 is equal to 3.14 times r squared. Now using algebra, we can divide both sides by 3.14. This is why these are the most difficult of these kind of problems, because we have to use algebra to solve for r. This will give us 100 on the left-hand side is equal to r squared. Now, we don't want to know r squared. This is a little bit like the Pythagorean theorem problems. We don't want to know r squared. We want to know r. And the way we can find that is to take the square root of both sides. That gives us r on the right-hand side, and the square root of 100 is 10. So that's the answer to this question, and you can see it's a few steps more difficult than just finding the area when given the radius. So if you want to review that again, take another look at this video, but we're going to move on now to a similar question involving the circumference. In this case, we know the circumference and we want to find the radius. So we first get our formula. Circumference is equal to 2 times pi times our radius. Let's fill in what we know. We know that the circumference is 18.84. And that's equal to 2. And instead of pi this time, I'm going to write 3.14 and r. So I could multiply the 2 and the 3.14 as a first step here. 18.84 is equal to 6.28 times r. Now, let's change my color here. And I'm going to divide both sides by 6.28 because that's what r is being multiplied by. We want to do the opposite operation as we have in other types of algebra problems where we're solving for a variable. That's all we're doing here. And that is going to be equal to r. And when we divide that out, we find that r is equal to 3. Now, a lot of times in these kind of problems, you might get an answer of like 3.01 or 3.1. You're going to round the answer as specified by the question or as indicated by the answers. So just be aware of problems, especially when you're working backwards like this, you may need to do a little bit of rounding. So keep in mind, these are the hardest kind of problems. There won't be too many of these in the practice, but I just wanted to prepare you and show you a few examples of that. All right, time for some practice. Good luck.